in some of his accomplishments. Ariel graduated as an English teacher in ES Olga Cosetini here in Rosario. He's currently working on his dissertation for Licenciatura en Lengua Inglesa. He also holds a diploma on learning differences from the University of Piura and is finishing a diploma on neuroeducación. He was awarded the British Council FLA scholarship and is also a Macmillan Gateway ambassador. He lectures in language phonology and methodology and is currently supervising a tutoring project to support trainees transition from high school into teacher training college in Buenos Aires province. And today he's going to talk about how this new reality seems to have added another layer to an already challenging situation, teaching teenagers. And he wonders, have the core principles for teaching teens been fundamentally altered during this new learning environment? And we will explore some proven good practice to guide our teaching and help our students navigate their learning process as successfully as possible. Hello, Ariel.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can the rest? Let's see. Yes. Yes,
Right.
Ariel, it's a pleasure. Yes. All right.
Well, thank you for the introduction. And I would like to thank Macmillan as well for this great opportunity. And to say that it all started last year when I was the lucky winner of the Teach with Dave competition. Okay. Yes. Spencer is the author of this bestseller, Gateway series. And I had the great chance of meeting a group of colleagues in London and explore the complexities of teaching teens, which in Dave's words is a criminally undercated market. Most things seem to be for primary school students, and few things seems to be focusing on teenagers nowadays.
Yes.
But that's a struggle that we need to keep fighting then.
Exactly. Nobody wants to struggle with that, as you said. Yes, it's a tough one. I was telling Alistair yesterday that he also presented on teenagers, that it is a tough one. So I think that's why there are so many people present here. We always need some advice on how to teach, motivate teenagers, and especially under these circumstances. Yes, and I love the title of your talk because it gives us a prospect, a future from lockdown to the physical classroom, because we will eventually one day be back there, but not as in the past. I heard the other day Santiago Bilinkis, technology expert, saying that next year the future will not be like 2020, but it's not going to be like 2019 either. So exactly. This is a challenge, I think. Okay, well, enough for me, enough of my voice. I'm going to pass it over to you. Have a great session and good luck. Yes, thanks everyone. Thanks, Ariel.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this session. It says a lot about our teaching profession that you're willing to invest a Saturday morning, part of your Saturday morning, on these webinars. Okay, so thank you for being here. And as Mayila was saying, this is a bit about this transitioning, but I have to clarify something. I have to give a caveat. When I originally pitched this idea to Macmillan, I was still hopeful a couple of months ago. I was still hopeful that by this time we would be transitioning into on-site or in-person teaching. And for those of us who live in Argentina, we know that that has not been the case. And there is no date for resuming on-site activities anywhere in sight. And there are few experiences around the world that we can tap into. So that section has been a bit shortened by me. So I apologize in advance. All right, so let's get started. I'm gonna show you the agenda for today. We're gonna be exploring the adolescent brain. We're going to be outlining and commenting on certain classroom strategies that may prove fruitful. and as well as speculate about what's going to happen when we finally resume insight activities. All right. So let me begin by sharing this quote. You probably know it. This by Benjamin Disraeli. He was a former British Prime Minister. He famously said, "Change is inevitable. Change is constant." And what I would like to you to do is to keep this idea of change in mind, both in reference to what it means to be a teenager, an adolescent, and also this is equally applicable to the current situation that we are experiencing in this emergency remote teaching situation. So change as an underpinning factor for both teenagers and our profession nowadays. All right, so let's get started with the adolescents. By the way, I'm gonna give you like a clue. If you want to see only the slide, you can minimize my image. If you don't want to see me, you can just see the slide. There's a button on the bottom right hand corner that you can do away with the image. All right, the teenager. I'm gonna show you a quote that has been typically cited in reference to teenagers. Okay, they have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents and tyrannize their teachers. Okay, this seems to be like a very generalized conception of what a teenager is. This was said over 2,000 years ago by Socrates, circa 470 BC, before the Common Era. So even from that early stages in human development, the idea of being a teenager has been shrouded by these sort of negative conceptions. Okay, because we can perfectly apply these to people describing teenagers nowadays. By the way, if you look at this quote by Socrates, you will probably, depending on the translation, you will find children or you will find the new generation. The thing is that the concept of teenagers and adolescents is relatively simple. Couple of centuries ago, you transition from childhood to adulthood directly. It's a relatively recent concept from the late 1900s onwards. All right, so let's have a look. Let's have a look at some of the typical these typical social perceptions of teenagers. Okay, so when we talk about teenagers, but socially speaking, we seem to describe these traits. They have a tendency to be self-absorbed. Okay, they seem to be at the center of the universe, and they have trouble moving away from this center. They experience these perspective-taking problems. They have difficulty adopting other person's perspective, so they typically go for their own perspective. So it doesn't come naturally to be empathetic. They experience these strong feelings of isolation and loneliness and sadness, which leads to this sense of overgeneralized negativity around them. Okay, they experience this is a transitional period, a time of loss and grieving. Okay, they're in this sort of limbo. They're no longer children, they're not yet adults, they do not know how to present themselves to the world. We as adults do not know entirely sure how to treat them as children, as adults, and these are major transitional period, and in which they try to explore and figure out their identity. They have strong identity issues. They need to know who they are, what their purpose is. And typically something that we associate with teenagers is this idea of having poor impulse control. Okay, they can do things that do not seem rational from an adult's perspective. Okay, so this is normally how we describe, socially speaking, teenagers. So the public discourse on teenagers has been mainly focused on these negative aspects, but I want you to try to have this is a question of perspective. Okay, do you know the story? Do you know the story of the blind man and the elephant? Let's see if you can type in the chat box. Do you know the story? Okay, some people know it. Okay, so I'm gonna say very briefly. All right, there we go. So this is, I think, it's a parable from a Hindu tradition. So basically it goes like this. A group of blind men come across an elephant, and they have never come across an elephant before. So the only way for them to conceptualize it is by touching it. And each of the blind men touches a different part of the elephant. Okay, so the blind man touching the tail thought that it was a rope. The blind man touching the leg thought it was a tree trunk. The blind man touching the side of the elephant thought it was a wall. And the blind man touching the tusk thought it was an arrow. And the blind man touching the trunk thought it was a serpent, thought it was a snake. So the moral of the story is that there's a danger of limiting our vision. Okay, and as humans, we have this tendency to claim absolute truths based on a limited or restricted experience or vision. Okay, this is probably what happens with teenagers. Okay, if we focus only on the negative aspect, we fail to see the whole elephant. Okay, as it were. Sorry about this analogy of, I'm not calling teenagers elephants. The analogy sounded a little better in my head. But you get the point, okay? Not individualizing or focusing on one aspect, but trying to see the whole picture, okay? The whole elephant. Okay. So now it's going to say that dealing with teenagers, we do tackle all these negative aspects that are associated with teenagehood. Whoever is dealing with teenagers, teaching teenagers, or being a parent to a teenager will know that whenever we interact, there's this starting contrast. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We see Dr. Jekyll sometimes and we see Mr. Hyde. And depending on who we're talking to, they will give us a different picture of who this person is. We need to put all the pieces together, and we need to understand that this is a natural process. And we need to be the bigger man or the bigger woman to understand that this is totally normal. Okay. But we now know that there are biological reasons why this happens, and it is perfectly understandable, and we should be extremely patient when this happens. Okay. Adolescence this is taken from UNICEF, which I would encourage you to go to UNICEF Innocenti project, and they have these very good publications on adolescence. So the brain goes through, during adolescence, the brain goes through another rapid phase of development. Okay, so there's a lot of structural remodeling and neural reconfiguring of key areas of the brain. And so at the same time, we have this potential of learning how to develop cognitive skills, of understanding your own emotions and behavior, of understanding consequences. But at the same time, it's a period of great sensitivity to social evaluation, to emotional reaction. This is part of what is happening to your brain, okay? During early adolescence, there's a surge of neurons, and then they go through two main processes that will affect the whole structure of the brain and who you become as a human being. Okay, let me show you the next one. The first big process is pruning. That's what we do in gardening. So imagine the following: when you're a child, you are soaking in the knowledge of the world. It's like you have a tree, and the tree is ever growing and growing and growing, because you experience everything you experience is learning, and you keep incorporating branches and leaves to your tree. But when you come to adolescence, early adolescence, there's a process, pruning process, as we do in gardening. So you start carving out the leaves and the branches that may not be particularly useful for you now. The function here is to specialize the brain in the areas that you find particular interest in. So it's a way of finding your passion. This is a moment when you start finding your passion. So whether that is dancing or sports or literature, you start focusing on these areas, and you make more effective connections, synapses. So this connection between neurons, and this operates in a use it or lose it kind of principle. So if certain areas are no longer useful for you, and you do not regularly use it, these connections will gradually be lost. Okay, so this is a differentiation element. So to specialize your brain. The second process that takes place is myelin formation. This has to do with linking your neurons. So myelin basically is like a healthy sheet that covers the connection between neurons, the synapses. So what myelin does is to make these connections more effective. So the connection between one neuron to the next will go faster and more effectively, up to 3,000 times more effective. So there's the combination of these two processes, pruning and myelination, is you get an integrated brain. You get more focus on your brain, and you can use this newly gained focus to lead you to better neurocircuits. Okay, so this is what we need to bear in mind. This is a great moment, a great window of opportunities that teenagers have to reshape and remodel who they are and who they want to be. And this is where we come into place as meaningful adults to guide them and help them transition into a positive direction. Now, if we, let me see if I can move on to the next one. Okay, another thing to bear in mind is that the brain will keep developing until well into your mid-20s. Okay, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, is what it will keep developing until your mid-20s. This is the part of the brain that is crucial for executive functions, for decision making, and for part of your personality. This is why sometimes asking a teenager why they stayed up till 4 in the morning playing video games when they have lessons at 8 is just as useful as asking your puppy dog why they messed up the carpet. Okay, I don't know if you've been hearing the news about the opening universities in the States. Lots of university campuses have been opening up and shutting down 10 days or 2 weeks after opening up. What happened was that these 19 or 20-year-old kids, when they went to campus again and supervised by adults, they started organizing parties and they got infected in a couple of days. This is explainable in the sense that they are still developing their prefrontal cortex and the idea of the consequences of their actions. Okay, so if we bear that in mind, it will mean that we need to develop this greater patience and guidance for our students. Okay, so before moving to classroom strategies, what I want to draw from this outline of the adolescent brain, I would like to add 2 more concepts. I don't know if you are familiar with Françoise Dolto. She was a French psychologist, and she came up with this beautiful analogy called the lobster complex. Okay, so she compared this transitional period of adolescence as when a certain species of lobster, when they outgrow the hard shell, they leave the hard shell behind and they move until they find a hard shell that they can feel comfortable with. Now, this transitional period between one hard shell to the next, their body is completely vulnerable, and whatever happens to them in that period will leave a mark that will last a lifetime. And so she compares this with teenagehood. So we need to be extremely careful how we treat and handle teenagers, because whatever happens here may leave a mark that will last for the rest of their lives. And then the other thing that I like is exploring a bit attachment theory. Okay, originally it was developed by for children for children, but then the longest study conducted for the well-being of a person concluded that one of the protective factors for being happy and for developing well-being is having meaningful connections with non-parent adults. That is to say, we come into place, like as teachers, we need to create meaningful connections with our students. Okay, we are neuroscientifically speaking, we are hardwired to connect. We are hardwired to connect, not only to other people, but to a deeper sense of purpose of who we are and what we're doing. And this is crucial, and it has been crucial for guiding our teaching during this time. Okay, we have realized that sometimes we need to put aside our content knowledge and to create this meaningful interaction with our students, even if it is at the expense of using L1, even if it is at the expense of delaying certain content. Okay, we are hardwired to connect to other people, and we need to. This has been particularly clear during this time of remote teaching. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna, again, this question of perspective, I'm gonna go back to this elephant analogy a couple of times. Okay. So if we only focus on the negative aspects of teenagers, we would probably lose sight of how to better help them, guide them through this process. We need to have a look at the whole elephant. If we want to summarize some of the tips of some of the recommendations that are out there, would be to reclaim a healthy vision of teens. Teens are struggling with identity issues, and this typically reflects in low self-esteem. So what we need to transmit is this positive message. We never should lose faith in them, even if we are struggling to cope with our outbursts. Okay, and as adults, as meaningful adults, that we should strive to become meaningful adults to our students, to our teen students. We cannot teach students we don't know anything about. Okay, so if we want to create meaningful connections, we need to harness these changes to create opportunities to create these neural circuits that will lead them on a positive path, okay, to good habits. So we're going to be exploring some of these elements, giving agency to students. When you give agency, you provide this element of control. Okay, so this element of, okay, I'm in charge of what I'm doing. So you provide options for the student's trajectory, learning trajectory, and leading eventually to autonomous learning. We will also be exploring cognitive overload. If I have to explain what cognitive overload is, I'm not gonna show you a video, but I'm gonna show you like this. If you're looking at my image, if I want to transfer the contents of this can onto a glass in one go, like this, in one go, non-stop, what would probably happen? what would probably happen? What would probably happen is that I will create a lot of foam, and it will overflow from the brims of the glass, and some of the content will be lost. That's cognitive overload. But if I transfer this a bit, I wait a while, and a bit, and I wait a while, I make sure that the whole content of the can is included, is in the glass. This is like a visual analogy to reflect what cognitive overload is. So we're going to explore some of ideas to handle that. Something that I have been particularly adept during this emergency remote teaching is getting frequent student feedback. Okay, what happened to me, and that probably happened to all of you, is that we were very uncertain about what we were doing. We were all treading on uncharted territory. So what happens is that we are doing a bit of trial and error. Okay, does this work? Does this not work? And so something that I normally do in the classroom, you get student feedback in the classroom, in the physical classroom, by checking their gestures, by looking at, you sort of feel the atmosphere. It's more difficult. It has been more difficult for me to get this feel of what's happening on the other side when we are interacting asynchronously or through Zoom or Meet. Okay, so I need to explicitly get this student feedback. And finally, I'm going to explore some assessment for learning options. I don't know if this is the case anywhere in the world. We are lucky enough to have people from different parts of the world, but in Argentina, it has been explicitly stated by the Ministry of Education that we cannot grade students. So we haven't been able to give them like a proper mark at the end of a term. But we still need to accompany the learning process and provide feedback. That is essential. So we're going to explore some of the tools that we can start using and how they can impact our teaching. All right. So I'm going to go very quickly over some of these options. All right. So you're probably acquainted with the concept of centers, learning centers. Okay, learning centers are designed to teach, reinforce, or extend a particular skill set or concept. So this is a way of providing options for students. If you provide options that students can take advantage of, you give them agency, you give them more responsibility for their learning and more control over that trajectory. Okay, we all need to get to a certain objective, but I can choose to get there in a different way. Okay, if you see the picture on your, I'm not really sure if I'm going to point it properly, on your left, the one with the students working in the physical classroom, that is what it typically looks like in a classroom. Okay, people working in groups and doing something related. Now, we can still do this if you have the chance to do synchronous meetings via Zoom. You can do the breakout rooms, but before you need to explain what the different centers are. So, for example, the picture here shows a writing center, but you can do a vocabulary center, a reading center, a speaking center. You design the kind of set of skills or concept that you want to emphasize, and then you group students based on their choices. This has been very helpful, and because they do this collaboratively, they learn from each other and they choose what area to focus on. A tip would be to keep track of the choices your students make sure that over the course of a certain period, they manage to explore the areas that you consider they need to explore. All right. Another way of providing choice and increasing agency is providing this sort of tic-tac-toe board game visuals. Okay, so what you do is, based on a language concept, in this case, it's a short story, you devise 9 activities. And what students need to do is choose 3, but to form tic-tac-toe. So the 3 choices should be like in a vertical line, in the horizontal line, or a diagonal line. And what I do normally is I use post-it notes. So I write the 9 activities in the post-it notes, and then I put them in an order in such a way that I make sure that whatever line they choose, they will be exploring different skills and different levels of challenge. Okay, so for example, in this one, if I choose the horizontal line in the middle, I would get interview a character. So in this particular task, you would create an interview with one of the characters of the short story, and then come up with the answers that you think that character would give. Okay, if I go in the middle, it's a simple visual and language task, which you have to paint or draw a scene and then write a line describing or explaining the scene. And the last option I have, creating an Instagram account. So choose one of the characters or the main character and create the Instagram account. What kind of posts would he make? What kind of picture will he post? And who, this is also important, who would be reacting to your posts? Okay, so we have 3 different types of tasks that will encourage or activate a different set of skills and at different language levels as well. And the good thing about this is that students will be reading the 9 options and then selecting the line that they think suits them best. That's a great way of giving them agency and fostering autonomy and self-awareness. Okay, this is what I'm good at, or this is what I want to explore. So this is a good exercise for them. Another way of providing this slightly differently is providing them like a restaurant menu. So this is a different way of providing with the same concept. So in a restaurant menu, you create your categories. In this case, there are 3 categories: starters, main courses, and desserts. Now, for each category, you will provide the activity options, and the task would be you need to select 1 activity from each category. Okay, so you make sure that each category reflects a different level of challenge or a different set of skills. So, for example, you can focus the starters on vocabulary work. You can focus the main course on skills development, and you can focus your desserts on a creative work. Okay, that's your decision. But whatever option they choose, you make sure that they choose 1 for each category, and each category will reflect a different set of skills or a depth in the language. All right. So this is for providing agency. And by the way, it's also a way of increasing motivation, where they know that they can choose what they have to do. It also increases intrinsic motivation. These are some ideas for managing cognitive load. Okay, so one typical way is using cognitive aids like graphic organizers and checklists. Now, checklists have been part and parcel of ELT community for ages now. So, for example, when we assign a writing, we typically associate it with a checklist. Like if you're writing a short story, did I include an engaging title? Did I use time linking phrases? Did I use a variety of past tenses, and so on and so forth? If you're doing an interactive task as well, did I make eye contact? Or so all these checklists are all these areas that you want students to focus on, and it will facilitate feedback when the time comes as well. Okay, it was great in this category, but not in this particular category. What can we do about it? Another way that I also like using is graphic organizers. Do you recognize? I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but can you recognize the graphic organizer at the bottom? The one with 3 columns is it's the KWL. So KWL. It's good for when you're beginning a unit. So it stands for what I know about this, what I want to know about this subject, and what I have learned or during this unit. So it's something that you use at the beginning and you keep modifying and adding as the unit goes along. It's a way of reflecting and putting into paper all the thinking process and all the learning that is taking place. Okay, another way is of the cognitive load, managing the cognitive load is managing the emotional atmosphere. Okay, we know for a fact that if you feel frightened or if you feel anxious, your brain is not predisposed for learning. So what we need to do is to make sure that we lower anxiety levels and we create a positive atmosphere where conducive to learning. Okay, this is easy said than done. The next one, and this is something that I had to rethink when we started with emergency remote learning, is that we need to challenge them on one element of challenge at a time. It's either new content or a new modality. So what happened to me, and I don't know if this is the same situation with you, I hadn't used Classroom, Google Classroom with my students this year. So it was a new experience where we transitioned to Google Classroom. And so the first time I assigned some quizzes or assignments, my teenage students struggled to use a Google Doc or submitting a task on the Google Classroom. And I took it for granted that these digital natives would know how to operate the Google environment, but I was wrong. I was clearly wrong. So these people can use sophisticated apps, can do a million things at a time on their computers. But when it came to using the Google environment and how to use a Google Doc and collaborate on a document and submit an assignment on the classroom, I needed to train them. So I realized that it's one at a time. Either if I change the modality in which we do something, I cannot introduce new content. And if I introduce new content, I use the same modality as they are used to. It's one at a time. Otherwise, the can overflow in the glass. And the last one for managing cognitive overload that I'm going to explore is promoting collaborative work. Now, collaborative work is brilliant for a variety of reasons. Also, managing cognitive load because you're sharing the responsibility of what needs to happen. Now, I'm not going to be exploring this, but this is typically my two biggest friendly activities for this would be focusing on task-based learning, creating this end of unit or end of week or end of a term task to work collaboratively, or small scale project work. Okay, this is something that has proven to be highly motivating during this time, because if you give, for example, if I know that in some contexts the students get only like a worksheet a week to complete or mark, and after a while it gets repetitive and it gets demotivating. So including this collaborative task or this collaborative project work will go a long way into sustaining motivation and reducing cognitive overload. All right. Okay. The next one. Something else. Oh, there's a lot of comments going on. So something else that I would encourage is adding this sort of small elements of gamification to sustain motivation, especially in this second half of the year. I don't know if it's the same experience for you, but what I noticed like a marked downward spiral in the terms of motivation in my students. So we need to reinforce these positive feelings. One of them is adding this element of gamification. So you can, Alistair yesterday was talking about this, if you were lucky enough to be in his webinar, talking this idea of gamification. It reconceptualizes the use of the mistake. When you're playing a game, you get game over, you immediately want to try it again to move beyond that stage. So this idea of gamification is to reduce the value of the mistake and use it to your own advantage, and to create these positive circuits in your head that will make you go again and again until you finally achieve it. Okay, so we can add this sort of, I noticed that in this, particularly in this second half, it has become more evident the need to have these short-term goals for them to strive. it's very easy, it's very tempting to lose track of the end of year goals, especially if the government announces that everyone's going to pass the year no matter what. So we need to keep this carrot and stick sort of strategy, showing them that there are small goals along the way to keep them motivated. One particular game that I love is using escape rooms. Do you know what escape rooms are? Have you used it? I want to see, like, you can type in the chat box. Have you used them? Okay. Yeah, some of them love them. Many knows. So if you're not acquainted with escape rooms, I strongly suggest that you Google them, because these are great opportunities for synchronous meetings. Okay, so what I'm suggesting here is one called a page called thescape.com. This is a company in the States that specializes in escape room, physical escape rooms. But during this social distance restrictions, well, they did a monthly challenge free that is available on their sites. This is a picture of one such challenge. This is based on this is creation of a game clue. I don't know if you've heard of it, the one that you need to find. There has been a murder, and you need to find who the killer was, what weapon he used or she used, and in which room of the house did he kill the person. So what they need to do is collaboratively explore all the clues, and it's a decision-making task. It's a perfect decision-making task that they need to do collaboratively until they eventually get to the three clues that they need to give, like who the killer was, where, which room, and what weapon. Now, what I loved about this page is that they are very well designed. So you get, like, for example, fake Instagram accounts, you get audios, you get texts. It's very well done, and there's an introductory video that you can use. So you are actively exploring or using or tapping into all the language skills. It's brilliant. I would say no more groups between 4 and no more than 8. It gets a bit troublesome if you get into groups of more than 8. But you can do this during you can create breakout rooms to conduct escape room session for the whole class. Okay, and see which group wins or does it faster. Okay, and another one. Okay, are you acquainted with the Genius Hour? Do you know what the Genius Hour is? Okay, this is probably something more recent. Big companies like Google, for example, what they do, what has proven to increase productivity, is allow their employees to use a fragment of their working time to devote to a particular passion project, a project that they feel particularly interested in. So 20% of their working time they can devote to this passion project on their own. And finally, they can eventually, this could become like the next big thing for the company. So something similar could happen in your classes. You can give a limited amount of time, a week or a month, for students to explore something that they feel passionate about. So they decide the driving question, they decide what this element is, they decide whether to do it individually or team up with somebody else. They decide the deadline for submission of the final product, and they decide what the end product will be. Will it be like a reporting of something? Will it be the creation of a poster? Will I be recording a video to show you what I have been doing? But it involves research, and it involves personally driven research, and it's a great way of motivating students. In one of the classes I'm teaching, there's a group of boys who are creating an astronaut suit for a Mars mission by NASA. So they're doing lots of research, and they come up with their ideas of how to create this astronaut suit, which is brilliant. And I would have never thought of that idea myself. Next one. Okay, so something I said is that I needed a lot of feedback from students, more explicit feedback from students. Normally in the room, I get this feeling of, okay, I know what's happening, or I can sense what's happening, or because you hear a comment or you see people sighing or yawning, but you get a lot more feedback in the physical classroom. Here, it was more difficult for me. So I implemented on a weekly basis this idea of getting feedback from students, how much it could be from how much they understand doing the feast to 5, so doing the number, doing the 2 stars on a wish. So like, probably you know this strategy. 2 stars on a wish is 2 things that they liked about the lessons in the week or the last month, and the wish would be 1 thing that they would like to see happening in the lesson. Okay, so it's not only how much they understand about the topic, but what they are enjoying or they're not enjoying, or what they would like to see happen in the lesson. And sometimes you get, you know, the typical answers, I do not want language exercises, but sometimes you get like really good feedback from teenagers, which is amazing. Another thing that I have been using a lot is Google Forms. Like, it would take literally like 2 to 3 minutes for them to fill in a Google form at the end of a lesson and provide immediate feedback. So this is something I highly recommend, because we're all treading uncharted territory. So we're never sure that what we're doing is actually correct or we're going in the right direction. This has helped me a lot too, and I will definitely keep doing this, or we will move back to in-person teaching. So as I anticipated before, we are not allowed to give like a proper mark or a grade to our students. So assessment for learning has become essential. Assessment for learning is basically has nothing to do with marking or grading. We basically need to ask these three questions, or 3 elements. So we need to know where we're going. It's just like when you Google something on Google Maps. You need to know where you're going, your objective, where you are, this self-assessment of where you are right now, and how best to get there. So these three elements: where we're going, where we are now, and how best to get there. And what is brilliant about this is that this is ongoing, and this is something that needs to happen one-on-one with each of our students. Okay, and how to get there will depend on these particular students. Typically, we have this vision of the best way to get there is this straight line that would probably be modeled by the best student in the lesson. But I can get there through other means as well. This is what Alejandra was talking about, accommodating to suit all the different neurodiversity that we see in our classroom. Okay, so this is the analogy. Some of the things that we can use. Okay, before moving on, I forgot about this. We need to remember, we cannot give them a mark, but we need to give them feedback. And good feedback follows these characteristics. Good feedback needs to be goal referenced. That is to say, we need to make it explicit to our students what the goal is. What are you expected to do? Okay, it needs to be actionable. Okay, it's not just giving, okay, this is a 6. Now, actionable means, okay, this is my comment, this is my feedback. How can I act upon this? How can I improve? What are the suggestions I'm going to be getting? It needs to be personal. So some feedback is like group-based, but personal feedback as well. So particularly in this remote learning, so using the names or repeating the name, Juancito, remember this, or Juancito, remember this. So make it personal, so that to make sure that you are talking to that particular person and not as a random individual. Needs to be timely. This is something that I have struggled enormously this year. For feedback to be effective, it needs to be timely. They used to say the student needs to get it while his ideas are still fresh on their head. If I submit the correction of a writing task I assigned in March, the feedback will be kind of lost, because he already forgot the process that he put into that writing task. This is something I have struggled enormously this year. It needs to be user-friendly. Imagine if in my feedback, I start using, I don't know, the international exam criteria for teachers. So some of the terminology may be unknown for students. So I need to make it student-friendly. It needs to be ongoing, that is to say continuous, and it needs to be manageable. Manageable in the sense of bites, how much can they cope at this particular time? Okay, imagine if a composition needs to be completely restructured. I cannot provide all that feedback in one go. I need to face it in different stages. So for the first redraft, I'm going to focus on these 2 or 3 elements. On the second redraft, I'm going to focus on these 3 or 4 different elements until we can sort of come up with a new final draft. But this needs to be manageable. Otherwise, it's overwhelming. Cognitive overload to 100 degrees. All right. Feedback sandwich. You probably you've heard about the feedback sandwich. It works in 2 different ways. The first one is beginning with a positive comment, including the constructive criticism in the middle with an idea of how to improve, and ending with a positive comment. So positive, what to improve and how to do it, and positive again. Or it can take the shape of the second alternative for the feedback sandwich. A contextual statement, I begin with a sentence like, I liked this because of this. Next time you could blah, blah, blah. And finally, an interactive statement or question. It's a question that you make on the work, like a personal reaction to this. Why did you choose this? Or have you experienced this in another? So a personal reaction that you make to the work. It's not just language based. Okay, so this is a feedback sandwich. This is something easy to implement and easy to teach your students for peer assessment. Another way that we can go to is using protocols, the KSR protocol. So this is something, again, very teachable for peer assessment. The K stands for keep doing. So keep doing this, because I like, for example, keep using linking markers as you did for this paragraph. Start doing, start paying attention to the use of your comma, and reformulate something that needs to be changed. So, for example, reformulate. Make sure that next time you fit the word count. Okay, so these are like 3 stages in which we can make a comment, and this is also good for handling lots of assignment at the same time. Instead of focusing on every little thing, we give like a general feedback first, and then they submit it again with the Berta version, and then we focus on more specific language points as well. It's a way of alleviating the teacher's work as well. Then the ladder of feedback. This is great. This is based on work by David Perkins from the University of Harvard and their Project Zero, which is a great way of including this visible learning thing. So basically, the ladder of feedback works on 2 different levels. The first level is to clarify. First of all, we need to make sure that we are operating on the same common ground, and we are going to be commenting and on the same task. But the task has to be understood. The second, the value, you comment on the positive aspects of the work. So you appreciate the positive elements of that work. In the third level, you express your concerns. What things may not be entirely up to standard in your opinion. And finally, and this is crucial, suggesting ways in which they can improve their work. Most of the feedback has to do with that. It's not just saying, okay, this is not correct, or this needs to be changed, but suggesting ways in which they can do this. Okay, remember, assessment for learning includes these 3 areas: where to go, where we are now, and how to get there. This how to get there is probably one of the weakest legs in our feedback, has been traditionally. I do not want to overgeneralize. So we're coming to an end, don't worry. So what is going to happen to Argentinian teachers once we resume in-person physical teaching? Probably, I'm assuming at the beginning of next year. Okay. teaching teams has always been challenging. Teaching teams has not been for the weak, for the faint-hearted ever, especially now that it has been more difficult to establish meaningful connections. I have been lucky enough to be teaching groups that I already knew beforehand. If I hadn't known these students beforehand, it would have taken me longer to establish these meaningful connections. But we still need to make that a priority. Establishing relationships and meaningful connections should be at the heart of what we do. And then, only then, can we focus on this content element of our subjects. But that is like something that I went back and revised in my teaching. So my suggestions would be to take stock. Do you know this phrase? When you take stock, you make a complete assessment of the situation before making a full decision. So at the end of the year, we should take stock and see what worked, what didn't work. And we have probably been faced with this idea of re-questioning our practice or identifying false certainties. Alejandra mentioned her concept of deconstructing what we know, and this is what we have been doing along this emergency remote teaching. We have been deconstructing what we know as teaching and coming up or ratifying certain pedagogical practices that make sense, both in-person teaching and remote teaching. I think the greatest gain for most of us has been that we have been learning and acquiring a completely new set of skills, particularly in relation to ICT tools. So it would be a real shame if we put that aside next year when we move back into in-person teaching. One of the greatest gains for me has been that I'm going to be systematizing the use of the online platform as another way of exposing students to the language, as another way of interacting with them, as another way of organizing my units. Okay, the worst thing that we can do next year is to begin as if nothing had happened. Based on what I read from papers around the world, we need to acknowledge 2020 when we begin next year, and we need to acknowledge what happened, and we need to incorporate all the things that we have acquired, all the experience that we have acquired, all the new set of skills that we have acquired during the course of 2020. I don't know if you agree. Okay, I'm reading some comments. I think you agree, some of them. All right. So the whole thing is not to segment things or see things in isolation. The idea is to see the whole elephant. Okay, to see the whole elephant, not just focus on one element, but to try to see this holistic view of the situation and of teenagers in general. Okay, and I like to finish with this quote: change is inevitable, as we said at the beginning, but growth is optional. It is up to us to grow as teachers and to help our teenage students to grow as people. Okay, so thank you for staying till the end of this webinar and this Macmillan Regional Conference. Thank you for investing in your professional development on a Saturday morning. And I'm leaving here my contact details if you want to get your presentation, or if you want to ask me a question, or crucially, if you want to start creating this network of professional development and working with other teachers. Okay, I think this has been essential to networking with other great colleagues around the country. So if you want to contact me, there's my Hotmail and my Instagram account. And I welcome back Mariela.
Hi, Ariel. It's been wonderful. Yeah, such an insightful, enlightening presentation. Yes, great. I don't know if we have some minutes for questions. Do you have some questions?
Okay, thank you for the comments.
Sorry, Ariel?
Thank you for the comments, putting some comments there. Thank you very much for
fantastic. It was amazing. Yes, everybody's thanking, and yes, thank you, Ariel.
Okay, someone was asking about rubrics. We understand rubrics is part of what we do for assessment for learning. So we create a success criteria for every assignment that we submit. So a rubric will contain categories that needs to be included in your work, in your assignment. For example, organization, for example, use of a range of grammar resources, punctuation, and then for each category there is a range of levels of achievement. Like, for example, developing, well done, expertly achieved. So a rubric is double element. Categories that need to be ticked off and how well these categories have been achieved. It's a great way of clarifying objectives beforehand, and it helps us provide feedback afterwards.
Okay, there is another question, Ariel. Do you use the same ideas for peer feedback among students?
Yes, what I have found particularly useful is implementing these feedback protocols. So once they see these feedback protocols implemented by the teacher and I explain them to them, they can start using it. So for example, the ladder of feedback can be used for peer assessment, or these KSR protocols, or give them sentence stems for them to complete. I particularly enjoy next time you should, or I would, and so they make comments based on an overall appreciation of the peer production rather than focusing on grammar or language exclusively.
Okay, and here's another question. This is a classic question. Yes, Daphne is asking, I have several adolescents who don't want to turn on their cameras in Zoom. How would you deal with that question? I think it has been a problem since we started,
yeah,
especially teenagers.
Yeah, well, teenagehood is a period of this deep insecurity. So there's a lot going on in a teenage mind, and it's like invading when we turn on the camera. It's like invading our own privacy. Now, I have to admit that I have been very lucky to work with groups that I already knew beforehand. We have established this connection, and I never struggled to get people to turn on the camera. So I've been very lucky in that respect. In one of the schools I'm working at, when I found out that other subjects have difficulty with the same students that I teach, that they do not turn on the camera, I was shocked. Like, how is that possible? There's a lot of factors into play. I wouldn't say that there's one particular way of solving this, but a good way, but it takes a long time, is creating these one-on-one moments with every student in the class. If you get one-on-one through a text message, through an email, even to a private chat during the Zoom session, you start creating this one-on-one relationship, and eventually it will be completely natural for them to turn on the camera. Or if you ask them, for today, for this activity, can you do this? Like, little by little, it will become sort of natural, a natural process, because I make the connection with the person who is on the other side of the screen.
Yes. Right. Okay, Ariel, again, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. We are closing the conference now. Before I forget, we will send you the certificate of attendance within the 7 working days. And also, before I forget, we are going to upload the conference videos onto our YouTube channel, but they are all, the conference is already uploaded in our Facebook channel as well. Yes. Brilliant. And just to finish, yes, remember, just a reminder, you can find out more about upcoming events. This is our social media. If you want the slides of the presentation, you can also drop us an email to argentina.eltinfo@macmillaneducation.com. And it's been a wonderful 2-day conference.